Welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chainy Podcast. I am your host, Nathan Chaney, and today we're going to be talking about the intersection of economic development and railroads with Ashley Wolfe, who's with OmniTRAX. Ashley, can you talk a little bit more about yourself and give us a little bit of your background?
Hi, Nathan. Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Ashley Wolfe. I am Director of Economic and Industrial Development at OmniTRAX. OmniTRAX is a shortline railroad holding company. We have 27 railroads, shortline railroads across the United States, and we also have a sister company that is a real estate development company.
Okay, and so I suppose that in your job role and OmniTRAX in general, it kind of marries those two ideas together.
Yeah, so you might be able to read it here. You'll see it on all of our marketing materials. Our slogan is "Powered by Rail and Real Estate." So our company is family-owned, headquartered in Denver. It's the Bro Group of companies is the parent, and underneath that parent company is OmniTRAX, which is a transportation company. So we provide rail service. We also provide economic development, commercial, and real estate development expertise. And that's kind of where our sister company, which is Bro Real Estate Group, comes into play. Also under the Bro Group of companies umbrella, but a real estate development company. And so our best projects, our favorite projects, are those where we get to marry up rail and real estate and the power of both to be very creative in finding solutions for our customers when it comes to how rail fits into their supply chain.
All right. Well, this seems like something that I've not had a lot of contact with, this type of role and in the short line in general. Can you tell me a little bit about, from an education perspective, from an early career perspective, how you got into this role?
Yeah, so I think if you ask, probably for supply chain as well, but certainly if you ask economic developers, how did you get into economic development? It's usually a really winding path, and most people are on career number 3 or 4, and that's definitely the case for me. So I thought when I was younger that I wanted to be a horse vet. I'm a horse girl. I've been riding since I was little. That still is my passion today. It's what I spend my personal time doing. But I thought I wanted to be a horse veterinarian as a career. So I went to school at Virginia Tech. I studied, actually, for my bachelor's degree was animal and poultry science, sort of in prep for vet school. I realized when I could not do physics very well or organic chemistry that I probably shouldn't put all my eggs in that basket. But I did end up in a career. Initially, I went into equine reproductive physiology, which is just a fancy way of saying breeding horses. And that transitioned over into training and sales of horses. And so I spent the first 10 years of my career in a very niche market of breeding, training, and selling high-performance sport horses. After a little while, I had just some personal stuff, some changes. I decided I wanted to be closer to my family who lived in Virginia. And so I made kind of like a 180-degree pivot on my career. I moved back to Virginia and thought, well, what can I do with 10 years of super specific horse sales experience and an animal science degree? And so I wound up in agricultural economic development. So I was working for Virginia Tech, which is a college that I went to, one of the land-grant universities. And I was working with farmers in Southern Virginia and helping them with agricultural marketing and also diversifying their revenue streams in Virginia. Tobacco is king still, obviously somewhat of a declining industry, and so there was a big push to try to help farmers who've been doing that historically to transition into something else. So I was really working in agricultural economic development, so on projects, economic development projects, but very specific to ag. And that eventually led me into an economic development role in Southern Virginia that was more traditional economic development. So I worked for the largest county, Pittsylvania County in Virginia, and I was representing the county to companies who were interested in having new sites, new locations, new facilities within our county. Then I had another personal change in life. I moved out to Arizona, and I was once again in a position where I thought, well, what can I do with my experience, and what kind of role can I get? So I ended up I was looking for economic development, traditional economic development roles, but through relationships, I found a job with Jones Lang LaSalle's Rail Practice Group. And that is a group that is contracted by BNSF Railway, which is one of our Class 1 railroads in the U.S., to assist with economic development. So as an economic development project manager with JLL, but really assigned to the BNSF Railway account, and was charged with somewhat the same thing, but a little bit of a different angle, working with customers, potential rail customers who were looking for new rail served sites to bring them to sites on BNSF in the territory where I had, which was Arizona and New Mexico. Then did that same job in Oklahoma and North Texas. And then about a year ago, transitioned to doing a very similar role for now OmniTRAX. So right now I would say working not only with potential rail customers, but also with state, regional, local economic development partners. So back to the other side of the house that I started on, and also site selectors, rail contractors, rail engineers, and these potential leads come from a variety of sources, but working ultimately to bring new rail customers to locate on sites along the railroads that we own across the network.
That really does seem to meander its way into
Yes.
what you're doing now. I mean, you're not alone, right? There's so many folks that have been on lots of podcasts, lots of people that are in the supply chain industry that kind of have stumbled upon, a career in the supply chain. And I've, gotten to talk to lots of folks, and when I introduce myself and I say, yeah, I studied logistics and supply chain, and this is actually what I intended to do with my life, and I've been doing it my whole life. That's almost like in the minority, right? It's I'm kind of the oddball out, sort of. So, but there's a lot of supply chain management degrees available now. Lots of universities have it, so it is kind of becoming more and more of a profession in and of itself, and we're not having to steal people from the other industries, I guess, right?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that after I kind of switched gears out of an agricultural focused role into a more business focused role, and especially when I switched from public side economic development to working for a railroad and doing rail economic development, it's really clear that I should go and further my education more specifically to help me with those new roles. And of course, I still find my animal science degree comes in handy because agricultural producers ship a lot of things by rail. So I'm still working with ag producers and agribusiness entities. But I did go get my MBA, and that's been really helpful in the later part of my career, just to sort of have that basic understanding of how business works and how to sort of marry that up, with experience, but also with my undergrad degree. So I did it 10 years after I completed my undergrad. I went back to get my MBA, and I never thought I would go back to school. So major, I would say one of my proudest accomplishments.
Yeah. I think that people that have had a varied sort of career path make for more interesting people to talk to whenever you're striking up a conversation at a conference, or you've got to go to some networking event. You can talk about some of your passions, and they happen to be something that maybe someone's not super familiar with. I mean, it gives you an opportunity to build a better bond and relationship with someone. Have you possibly come across anyone else in your travels and in your sort of relationship developments that you've been doing over the years that you've kind of been able to kind of befriend, but not on a business level, but from your passions being similar? I'm curious.
Yeah, for sure. Even people within our company, it's amazing really how often the horse connection comes up, and it's such a passion for me that if you talk to me for any length of time at all, I'll probably start talking about horses just out of habit, I guess. And so it comes out, if I'm at dinner with a potential customer, or even just, teammates that are in Denver, and, we're remote, but eventually horses come up. And so, yeah, it's been great. You can kind of see in the corner of my screen is my ribbon quilt, which is a bunch of different ribbons that I've worn over the years with my horse that kind of turned into a ribbon quilt. And so sometimes people notice that when we're on virtual calls like this, and it just ends up in a horse conversation. But yeah, no, for sure. It seems like a small industry, or a smaller, I guess, relative to the entire population of people that are interested in horses. But then again, like how frequently people are like, I have horses too, or, we do make a connection on the horse thing. It's a small world.
Well, when you go abroad, Americans in general are kind of equated to cowboys and Indians, and that horse culture, I think, is part of like the backbone of America, kind of, right? So you're kind of part of that original group of folks. How have you been finding, if we kind of zoom in a little bit more into the rail industry side of things, some of the maybe the similarities and differences between Class 1 railroad versus a short line or regional?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I think people that are in the rail industry sometimes just kind of gloss right over that and assume everybody knows. But at a very basic level, the Class 1 railroads are typically known for long haul of commodities. So, they have these big nationwide networks and they're moving commodities really long distances from, let's say the West Coast ports up to Chicago or something along those lines, right? There are 7 of them. Shortline railroads are different in they sort of extend the reach of the Class 1s to reach additional customers that are not directly on the Class 1 routes. And so when I say we have 27 shortline railroads across the U.S., it'll be X number of miles of track that goes from wherever the BNSF or wherever the Class 1 interchange point is. Let's say it goes another 20 miles in one direction. And there'll be more customers located along our rail line. And the way it works is the Class 1 partner will bring cars that are for those customers to an interchange point, and we'll pick them up and then we'll sort of deliver them last mile, if you will. Or on the flip side, first mile. We can kind of aggregate multiple different customers' shipments in one location, put them all on one train, and then bring them out our line to service our customers, which can result in a lower transportation cost and also, higher level of service, more of a white glove type of service. So that's kind of our role in the supply chain, I would say first mile, last mile, and how we work with our Class 1 partners across the network.
So what you're kind of doing here, it takes understanding of government sort of discussions and commercial real estate and land and rail and logistics and supply chain. It's a bit of a specialty, I suppose. One question that I like to try to ask folks that I have on, and because I'm kind of like a student myself, and I will be forever, so I'm always looking out for students. And so those students out there that might be listening to this podcast today, hearing what you do, think it sounds interesting, something like they might want to do someday. Any suggestions or advice for someone who wanted to plot a course today to kind of be where you are today? Any suggestions from school? I mean, you said you got your MBA, so obviously that was helpful, but any suggestions that you would make to those folks looking to do what you do someday?
Yeah, so to your point, there are programs now. I think those have evolved a lot more in recent days, where if you know up front that you're interested in working in supply chain, or if you're interested in working in even more specifically rail, or even in economic development not related to rail, there are more and more programs that colleges have created that are specifically for that. But and then on the graduate level, you can get an MBA, which is what I did, which is a more generalized degree. And then you kind of have to turn the wheels in your head to make, how does it apply to my specific industry? But there are programs. There's several people on our team that have gotten their master's in transportation. So Denver University, DU, has a program for that, which is basically an MBA, but an MBA in transportation. So that's an option. And then lots of transportation companies, I know BNSF does, I know OmniTRAX does, have internship programs. And so that's an option too. If someone's already in a college program and they're interested in learning kind of on the job a little bit and getting some hands-on experience, and internships are a really great way to do that. At
a more macro level, what is kind of the industry like, the job scene like for rail in general? There's a lot of jobs these days are very digital, and everyone wants to be online and working with data and that sort of thing. Is there a spot for that in the rail industry? Is tech being adopted more and whatnot, or is it kind of more of a hands-on type industry? I'm just not familiar enough to be able to answer that question myself. Maybe you could help out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think when people think railroad, they think about the operation side of railroading, right, which is definitely part of it, and that's a huge part of it. But then there are people that are in more specialized roles, kind of on the commercial side or on the marketing side, which is where I fit in. And there are some emerging trends. Some are low tech, some are higher tech. One of the things I could talk about, the one I referenced that's a little bit lower tech, is an example of a program that Norfolk Southern is doing. It's Norfolk Southern's Shortline Performance Program. And there's been some recent news articles about this, an effort that Norfolk Southern partnered with 40 of its Shortline partners to really improve the interchange efficiency and the communication around the interchange. So again, the interchange point is where Norfolk Southern will bring the cars to the Shortline partner and kind of hand them off. And then the Shortline partner takes them on to the customers that are on the Shortline. There's this new initiative. They're actually just using a spreadsheet, so it is nothing really high tech. So I say it's a low tech solution, but it's a method whereby they can track the performance. So if Norfolk Southern says this many cars were delivered on this date, Shortline can say only this many were delivered, and vice versa. And it's a way to kind of better understand what's happening real time as compared to what the data says is happening, and overall just improve the customer experience and make things run more efficiently, which then facilitates growth. And if they're providing good service, Class 1 and Shortline combination, partnering to provide really strong service to these customers and improve the way we function at that interchange point, this facilitates our ability to grow rail volumes with those customers, which benefits all of us. I've also got a high-tech example. So in all of the states where we have railroads, there will be a state office of economic development, and oftentimes when companies are looking for a new site, they will go to the state's office of economic development, who will issue an RFI, request for information, and that will be disseminated to all the regional and local level economic developers within that state. There'll be specific requirements listed in there. Company ABC is looking for a site of X acres. We need XYZ utilities. Rail is a requirement. Those are the ones we participate in, obviously. The kind of standard old way to respond to those RFIs is just to individually, manually fill out like an Excel sheet response to provide all of the information on the sites that you may have that would fit. And so there's a couple new systems. One of them is called LOIS. It's Location One Information System that's been developed. That's a way for all of those folks who have sites that want to get them in front of decision makers of companies who are looking for sites can upload all the information. And then there's another one called Lasso, which helps for economic developers to fill out the RFIs. So it remembers all the information that you put in from previous RFIs. It remembers all the site information. The two communicate with each other, the two different programs, to ultimately make it so that you don't spend hours inputting in the same information. And the end result is economic developers and folks like the partners that we have that either ourselves directly for sites that we own, or the economic development partners that are representing sites along our railroads that we don't own, to respond to these RFIs and get our sites in front of either company decision makers or site selectors who are in the market for a new site.
You know, if a spreadsheet is an upgrade from the way the system was before, I'm concerned about asking the question of tell me about what it was before. But on these previous ones, on Lois and Lasso, Lois and Lasso, it sounds to me kind of like a universal portfolio. So you've got your portfolio of your sites and what you have to offer. It just seems like a much easier way to be like, okay, here's all the ones that check the boxes. This is going to be what gets sent for you for this RFI process.
Yeah, submit, check the boxes. You've already pre-uploaded information. You've already completed RFIs, and it just has the memory to be able to make it so much faster to get those sites in. So I think that's something that it is really more of a tool that the entire economic development industry is using, but certainly those of us in rail economic development are also benefiting from. Our company has a couple of different initiatives around marketing of our sites that are also technology based. So we have a program called Rail Ready Sites, which is where we have gone out along all of our rail lines, and we've worked with our local economic development partners to identify sites that are adjacent to our line that we feel like, we'll say rail capable, or potentially a good rail site, whether there's existing rail infrastructure there or that could possibly be built to provide rail service to the site. We cataloged those sites and have done some initial due diligence on them, and have created flyers for them and have those hosted on our website as a way to help people, again, who are, when companies are looking for a new location, if they have rail as a requirement, it usually rises to almost the very top of the list, right? They know they need it in their supply chain, and then they're only looking at sites that can check that box. And so this is a way to help us market those sites. Take it the next step further, we're working on a GIS mapping type of system whereby we can have those sites and other sites along our rail line, whether we own them and market them or not, available to be searchable on our GIS map. So you can pull up parcel data on who owns them, and beyond just site-specific data, can even pull up demographic data for the area. So how close is it to the nearest airport, or what's the labor force like within an X mile radius of this site? So, public, some information that we've had a GIS system internally where we can kind of reference some of this information ourselves for several years, but this is an effort to kind of create a public-facing, searchable platform where, again, it's all about getting our sites visible to those folks that are looking for them when there's a rail requirement there. And this is just a next step that we're taking to kind of check that.
Gotcha. GIS is certainly a more modern, I think I have a cousin that got a degree in that. And that's definitely very numbers crunchy and analytical, right, to put all that together.
Yeah.
I'm curious, again, forgive me, but, I think you may be one of the first people that I've ever met that's in economic development. So could you, in simple terms, kind of tell me, what kind of the day in the life of an economic development professional is like? You mentioned RFIs a while ago, building relationships. There's more to it than that, I would imagine, or is that kind of the big buckets of activities?
Yeah, so it's very relationship driven, relationships of lots of different kinds. And so I had mentioned previously that a big part of the role is relationships with our state, our regional, and our local level economic development partners. So when I say that, that's typically the governor's office at the state level. A regional economic development partner would be someone who covers, a series of counties, or maybe a city and a county that are together. And then a local partner is someone who covers just a single jurisdiction. Let's say the town of Windsor in northern Colorado is a good example of a local one. And then upstate Colorado is a regional one that covers the town of Windsor plus lots of other towns in that area. And then we even have Metro Denver EDC, which is another even larger regional economic development partner. And then state of Colorado has Colorado's Office of Economic Development and International Trade. So you can kind of see the different levels. And of course, the state is responsible for bringing a project to the state. It doesn't matter where it goes in the state. Regional, same thing. They want to bring it to the region. And of course, the locality, their effort is to try to bring it to their locality. And so, yeah, we definitely work through those channels. Again, companies that are looking for sites, or site selectors that are hired by companies to help them find sites will often go through that formal process where the state and then down to the regional, local, and then the responses kind of go back up that same chain. But we also are working directly with rail customers. So with a network of 27 railroads, we've got existing customers along all of those lines. And so a lot of growth opportunity comes from those existing customers that perhaps want to have a new location in a different market, and they're already accustomed to working with us. And so they'll look at where we have railroads in other cities that they're interested in, or expanding their existing footprint to be able to handle more volume as they grow. And then also just prospecting, just cold call outreach prospecting, trying to get an understanding of what markets are rail centric, what things move by rail typically, and sort of what are the commodity flows within that market, and then trying to identify companies who may have a need for rail sites, and then reaching out to them to sort of explain who we are and what we do.
I'm curious, we're talking about trains here, and in any industry, there's cycles up and down, and there's things that, keep people up at night, cause a couple more gray hairs. What's that for you, kind of in the position that you're in there at OmniTRAX?
Yeah, so I think it's growth. OmniTRAX as a company is very growth oriented. We're the fastest growing shortline company in North America. We just continue to add more dots on the map, which is amazing. And it's very exciting to be part of it. As a company, we're very growth oriented. My role then within the company as on our economic and industrial development team is, drive the growth, find the new customers, bring them in, and help them through the process to kind of get up and running and ultimately drive volume growth to our railroads. So what keeps me up at night, what probably gives me gray hairs, is how to always continue to be growing, and how to be the facilitator of growth within the company, particularly in economic conditions that are maybe not as favorable, right? So When I was at BNSF, which was the job I had before this one, someone shared with me a Warren Buffett quote. And I probably won't get the words exactly right, but the gist of it was that rail car loadings are a leading economic indicator, meaning that if you watch how much lumber is moving on the railroad, or how much agricultural products are moving on the railroad, construction products. If you look at what is moving, rail volumes, it's a very early indicator of what's happening in the more macro level economy, because those are all raw materials that go into processes, right? If lumber volumes on the railroad start to decline, then that can be an indicator that maybe, new builds, new construction of housing is going to start to decline. Or if agricultural products moving on the railroad starts to decline, that can be an indicator of, things in the food industry. And so it's interesting to kind of be able to be on the front end of that, right? We're always looking at volumes, and that's a key metric for us, obviously. And so, to watch that, if things are going to start to decline, we start to see that first. And then on the flip side, when things are getting better and the economy is improving, then we're one of the first ones to start that incline. And so this year, I think for those that aren't in the rail industry may be new information. For those that are, I think it's not new information. That it's been a little bit of a challenging year. Volumes are not as high as people expected them to be. And I think a lot of that is interest rates are high, cost of capital is high even for really established companies. It's a time where I think people are a little bit on a let's wait and see kind of mode. We've also got presidential election coming up. I think economic and political uncertainty related to that. So yeah, I think it's a time. These are the projects that I work on are huge capital projects, right? It's a lot of money being invested. They're longer timelines. 18 to 24 months from go time is up and running time, and so there's a lot that goes into these projects and these decisions, and so that is the biggest thing I think is how to continue to grow in a time that's just a little bit uncertain.
Is there possibly a tailwind, kind of putting a little bit of wind in your sails regarding kind of nearshoring and kind of a push to have more production here in the U.S., which kind of requires more infrastructure and rail and moving things here in the United States versus other countries in the past?
Yes, I would say definitely. And so there's a lot of federal funding support for that as well. And so some of the projects that we see are they are in the process of applying for funding. Let's say the CHIPS Act, for example, federal funding that's coming down that should be soon. That they make notifications for awards on that. And so yes, I think at a high level, there's going to be more and more manufacturing happening in the U.S. And a lot of that will require direct rail service. And so I think there'll be lots of opportunity, and I think there'll also be lots of federal funding to help with that. So yeah, I do think that the future is bright. I think we're just in a little bit of an uncertain time, and I think we'll come out of it.
This too shall pass, huh?
Yeah.
One last little topic here that, especially in heavy industries, where there's physical things happening, I don't ask this question of the technology and software guys. Yeah. Safety. So safety is a big topic. How do you all approach that there at OmniTRAX? What's your approach?
Yeah, so safety is a company pillar. It is part of everything that we do. It's part of every activity. We don't have a meeting without having a safety briefing as the very first thing on the agenda. And everything else in between that, and actually operating rail cars, and safety is a component of it. We pride ourselves on industry-leading safety performance. So service is really important, of course, getting the job done and getting it done on time. And, that really matters to our customers, but also getting it done safely. And our customers and our communities that we operate in really rely on us to do that.
So as we kind of wrap up our time here talking today, Ashley, I like to try to give every guest an opportunity to kind of just pull out their soapbox, grab a topic that they're passionate about or want to make sure that everyone's aware of, something that's on their mind, something coming up. Is there anything in your world that you'd like to kind of make sure our guests leave with today?
That's a good one. Let me see. Let me talk about something. This is relatively specific, but I feel like it's an interesting topic for those that are not directly involved in maybe finding a rail site, but also a really important topic for those that are. So one of the things that happens to come up quite a bit when we're talking about this RFI process and how do we get prospective sites in front of those people that are looking for those sites is this idea of intermodal versus carload or manifest. And those are two different networks in the United States. And so I do feel like I get a little bit on a soapbox about that once in a while. Maybe not necessarily a soapbox, but just like it's part of the process to try to understand what is truly the customer's need and then what do we have that can truly meet that need, right? And so the intermodal network is containers that are moving in ocean-going vessels coming into a port. And then once they get to the United States, they will move between from intermodal hub to intermodal hub. And so you'll see, and the containers can be anything inside of them, right? They're consumer goods of all kind, but they're in a traditional container. So they'll move hub to hub, and then trucks are a component of the move for the first mile, last mile, right? So containers do not move directly to customers' sites where there's a rail spur and it goes right into the customer's building. It'll go to an intermodal hub, and then the building will be located hopefully very close to that hub, and there'll be a trucking component, and that's called drayage. That's the terminology. Someone is interested in setting up a new site, and their inbound materials are shipping by container to a port, and then this would be the way they would travel. They may not necessarily need a direct rail spur. They may need to be located in very close proximity to an intermodal hub. And then there'll just be a little trucking component. On the flip side, the other network, some people refer to it as manifest or carload, which is where every other kind of rail car, a more traditional rail car, so a box car or a tank car or a flat car with lumber, there's all these different kinds of rail cars that carry different types of commodities. And the type of car that you use is dictated by the commodity that you're moving. Those move on a totally separate network, and they can move directly from point A to point B. So let's say a producer of X commodity is in Arizona, and a receiver of X commodity is in Texas. They both have rail-served facilities, meaning they have direct rail spurs into the facility. Those rail cars can get loaded at customer A's facility, and they can travel on the manifest network directly to customer B's facility. And that requires, so again, if a customer is needing to receive products directly by rail and they're coming in a car, any other kind of rail car besides a container, then they do need a site that has the ability to have direct rail service. And so this is a little bit in the minutia. This is like in the weeds, right? But a lot of folks, I feel, they don't necessarily, they don't realize, or they don't completely understand that these are the same rail companies are moving these cars on these networks, but these networks are pretty different. And so there are exceptions to every rule, right? There are exceptions where there can be a private intermodal facility and there would be enough volume that containers could go directly to somebody's site. But that's the exception. Most of the time, intermodal hub to intermodal hub versus direct rail service. So I feel like in my world, either I'm trying to understand the need from an RFI, or I'm sort of coaching a local economic development partner on how to respond to an RFI, or even working with state economic development offices and the project managers that lead these site selection processes to understand, so that we can help to put together solutions that make sense. Hopefully not too complicated.
Yeah, so with that sort of, kind of got to put your teacher educator hat on and try to uncover what the real need is. And in some instances, you are possibly uncovering that they don't need to be on a rail siding, that just being close to an intermodal terminal is really what they're after.
Yeah, or maybe you get really creative and you can do what's called transloading, which is when you take it out of a container and put it into a traditional rail car, or vice versa. Or transloading can also be when you take it out of a rail car and put it into a truck, or vice versa. It's basically you're going between modes. We're I think the only Shortline team that has dedicated in-house economic development people who have done work on the other side, so to speak, on the public side of economic development and have been in those roles, understand how that works, what motivates those folks, which is, capital investment, job creation, average wage of jobs that's higher than the local area, but that also has rail expertise and has access to real estate expertise to be able to kind of combine all of that knowledge to help sort of be the bridge between the economic development community, the site selection community, and the rail industry.
It sounds like that's a key component of that growth strategy for OmniTRAX, is having that capacity and that talent in-house.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for educating us a little bit today on some of the intricacies of the railroad industry and also about economic development in general. Really appreciate your time here today. Any last words on your part?
I think so. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been great talking with you. And again, hopefully, I feel like people, when they get in the zone and they start talking about their industry, start using all kinds of acronyms, and they just assume everybody knows what they're talking about. Hopefully I did not do that. Hopefully I was able to provide just some insight into what is a little bit of Railroad 101, Class 1 versus Shortline, and then also what is economic development, and then how do railroads participate in the economic development community and marketplace based on those relationships.
I think you did a great job. No Greek was used here today, I think. And then if you can include the word spreadsheet somewhere in a podcast, everyone's understanding, right? So, anywho, okay. Well, thank you so much, Ashley, and I'll see you around.
Thanks, Nathan.